Welcome to The Craft. I'm your host, May Globus. This podcast is a collection of intimate conversations on artistry, mastery, and life with talented, passionately curious creatives and entrepreneurs. Most are dear friends, some are those I've admired from afar. I hope you enjoy these conversations, this exploration of the humanity that connects all of us, as much as I do having them. Thank you for being here and for listening. Juno Kim is a man with a deep, deep soul. He became a household name among the food and creative worlds after launching Juno Kim Catering, marking his successful run in the culinary space, despite any formal training. The son of immigrants from South Korea, he spent much of his childhood moving from city to city, school to school. After graduating from university, he found himself becoming a chef, reimagining people's sensory experiences with food, with his intricate seasonal dishes to great acclaim, before a major burnout in 2017 led to a period of self-exploration. In this layered conversation, we dive into his childhood, his reintroduction to meditation, a passion for matcha and the ceremony of tea, what it means to thrive in the world, and more. Please enjoy this intimate and personal conversation with the very perceptive Juno Kim. Juno Kim, welcome to The Craft.
Thank you, May. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time and being here and your presence. I'm very, very excited to explore a lot of different topics with you.
Yeah, I'm honored and grateful.
Yeah.
Grateful to be here.
I always love to try to connect the dots on how we met. We were having a little pre-chat, and I was saying to you initially, I thought it was during your catering days, maybe at an event that I was attending, but it actually was way before that in 2011, 12, when you were a buyer, no, at Chrome Yellow?
Yeah, I was a buyer for a boutique in Gastown called Chrome Yellow. Yeah, feels like 2-3 lifetimes ago now, but yeah.
Yes, and the reason why I do, when I realized, oh my gosh, it was further back than I thought. I had mentioned to you is because I really remembered your presence and the way you carried yourself. So it was so nice to continue running into you over the years at different events as you moved more into your culinary journey, which we can dive into. But do you also remember we had a meeting when I was still at Rennie? And you were with Here There, I believe it was called, right?
Yeah, Here There
with
YVR.
Lizzie and Ken.
Yeah.
And we were chatting about perhaps doing an art and food experience at the Rennie Museum, which never ended up coming into fruition. But I remember thinking that it could have been such a great activation, and specifically because of the way that you approach these experiences, or the way you did, approach these experiences with food, which we'll explore later. But I want to take it way back into your childhood.
Ooh,
yeah.
Okay.
I want to know about your mom, dad, any siblings. You were the son of immigrant parents from South Korea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got quite a maybe unique circumstance of how I ended up where I am. So not many people know this. My close friends do, but I actually have 2 older brothers. And so my parents decided to move, like around the time I was born, they wanted to immigrate to Canada. And so that ended up happening when I was about 4 years old. And I remember when we were moving, my brothers didn't want to move because they were already in school. They were older than me. And so they were already in school and they didn't want to leave their friends. And I totally understand that. And so my parents made a really difficult choice, that they would come with me and my oldest brother, and my middle brother stayed behind with my grandma. And I think the hope was that he would eventually come around to coming to Canada. But it never happened. And then my oldest actually ended up moving back to Korea after some years. And so, yeah, I was 4 when we moved from Korea. And then we went to Montreal because that's where the immigration was accepted to. I think back then, and maybe still, you didn't really get to pick where you went. So Montreal was the cards we were dealt. And so we moved there. My dad ended up pursuing his passion project of opening an antique store. And so he opened an antique store on Sherbrooke Street, which is like maybe like Hastings is our comparable, where it's just like super long, connects
Mm.
many different neighborhoods. And yeah, it I think I think we weren't doing too well, but we weren't doing too bad either. But I think the winters were getting to my parents, and so
Mm-hmm.
once they were allowed to move, we picked Vancouver. Well, they picked Vancouver. I just came along for the ride,
Right. Yeah.
and so moved to Port Moody. Grew up there. Went to French immersion. French was actually my second language that I learned, so it went
Mm.
Korean, French, English.
Wow.
Yeah, and then English is the only one I'm fully fluent in now, although
Mm.
I can communicate with the other two.
Wow.
Yeah, and so spent some time in Montreal, moved here, went to French immersion. Um, yeah, and then went to English school in grade 7, then moved to UBC
Mm.
when I graduated. And so I think a lot of my childhood was marked by lots of moving around. And so one thing I've noticed in my, returning back to exploring my childhood these days is that I never had like a core group of friends ever, because by the time I became friends with people, I would move.
Mm.
And even when I moved to Port Moody, I went to French immersion school in Port Moody, and then I went to one in Coquitlam, and then I went to a middle school in Port Moody. So
Mm-hmm.
by the time I hit high school, the longest I've ever spent in one school was 2.5 years. Yeah, and
Yeah.
back then we didn't have social media, and I was super young, so I didn't get people's contacts, and so just never kept in touch
Mm.
with a lot of my friends that I had back then.
Right.
Hmm.
And how did I'm curious, with all the moving, how did you feel as a child? Did it make you feel um, ungrounded, or yeah, what was that feeling that you
Hmm.
had with the moving?
Yeah, I mean, with my culture that I came from, I think emotional intelligence isn't, or at least it just wasn't part of my life back then. So it was hard for me to understand. I think the internal struggles, internal sensations, feelings that I had back then. Um, I think I was, for the most part, a happy kid, but I know there was a lot of moments of feeling, um, maybe feeling a lack of love and belonging, as well as feeling different all the time. Like I always
Mm.
felt different from everyone else,
Mm.
and not in a positive way back then. Um,
Right.
yeah.
And I know that kind of connecting this to, the ways that I know you now,
Hmm.
and community is so important to you
Hmm.
now as an adult. And I'm wondering if, that that sense that you have of building community is because, of how you felt back then and not having a close group of friends.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it also speaks to like when I'm most centered around community. I find it tends to be when I'm in a good place mentally, and
Mm.
my mental health has always been rocky throughout my whole life.
Mm.
There's times when it's really great and times when it's really bad, and for most of the times that it was good, looking back, it wasn't so much like an internal shift that happened. It's just my external environment was really good at the time. Like I was excelling in school or something, or
Mm.
I had lots of friends at that time in my life. And so those were the moments that I felt really, really um, community oriented. I think when I'm thriving, that's when I'm very community oriented. Yeah.
Mm.
Even in my catering career, I look back and there were definitely some dark moments in it, and during those times I'd get very insular,
Yeah.
very to myself, disconnect from the world.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, you could ask a mutual friend of ours, David Walmsley. There would be days where I'd just disappear. Like he would text me and I just wouldn't respond for
Mm.
multiple days. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I think that community, I think it's just so core to my being, but I can only access that when I'm feeling good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The word you used was thrive, when you feel like you're thriving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what were mom and dad like?
Oh, my dad was very, what's the word I want to use? passionate. He was he grew up, you know, he was, I think, born just coming out of the Korean War, and so I think he had a lot of things that he endured, and so you know, emotionally, I think he was very loving, but at times he could be very strict and very, um, let's say, stern.
Mm,
I mean, I think a lot of Asian um, people who grew up with Asian parents, I think a lot of them can relate to that. And so there would be times where my dad would be pretty intense,
mm,
but I know that it comes from a place of love. And so, yeah, and then my mom is so loving. I remember actually thinking back, I noticed periods where my mom had a lot of anxiety,
mm.
and I think that's something that connects us on a, you know, on that side of the mental health spectrum.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think they were very loving in terms of work. My dad did the antique store. Um, he was super into it. And then my mom was stay-at-home mom for most of my life. And then at one point, my dad decided to close down the shop, and so my mom started working then. And so she became an assistant for physician.
Mm,
And yeah,
mm. The antique store, you said it was your dad's dream to open one.
yeah.
Do you think that's maybe where some of your like love for design came from? Did he have that same love, or was it no?
No, I mean, different. Like he was really into what era would that be? Like, you know, post Renaissance, early 1900s. Like that's what he was super
Mm,
into. Those eras. And I remember growing up, like I spent a lot of time in that antique store, right? Because you know, I'd come home from school and I would just go straight to the store and be there until the store closed. And I hated antiques because of it. Like I was a little kid and I was like, I hate antiques so much. Like they smell, they're like old, and like to me they weren't nice, and they weren't cool and new and hip. And so yeah, I think for a long time in my life I absolutely hated the idea of antiques until my adult life, when I could come back around to it and
yeah, and
appreciate it
appreciate
for,
it.
yeah, yeah. And my parents would watch Antique Roadshow on the weekends,
No
and
way.
I'd hate it so much.
You're like, I just want some cartoons, please.
Yeah. Exactly.
And was food a huge part of growing up for you?
Yeah, yeah. Food's been an interesting exploration looking back, because my mom makes incredible Korean food from scratch. Everything's from scratch, and there's so much love put into it. But you know, as a kid, and this goes back to what I mentioned about feeling different all the time. Like I didn't want to bring the kimchi to school and stink up the classroom during
Hmm.
or during lunch hour. I didn't want to, you know, other kids were like, oh, I'm having like hot dogs or pizza. And I'm like, oh, I'd love to have hot dogs or pizza for dinner, which never
Hmm.
happened. And so I think when I was young, there wasn't as much appreciation, but looking back, I just have so much warmth and fondness around how incredible my mom's food was. And now that I've like gotten to this point in my life, I'm starting to explore. Funny, I didn't do it while I was catering much, but now I'm starting to explore these like recipes that my mom would make, and start to
Mm.
see, yeah, it's just beautiful, like how it connects to like not only a particular culture, but also that history of that culture, and then it connects me to my mom and everything that represents. And so,
Right.
and then combining that with now, and so like the local ingredients, the seasonality of the style of cooking that I really enjoy, and then fusing that together with my mom's love that she's kind of passed down to me. And so
Mm.
that's been a really fruitful exploration.
Yeah, well, thank you for the love that you brought me.
Mm.
For everyone listening, he brought me some kimchi that he made.
Yeah, of
So thank you.
course, my pleasure.
Um, yeah, let's explore this next chapter of your life as as a caterer, we had mentioned that you were working in luxury retail and fashion for an independent boutique, and then you left it to pursue food. Can you tell me about the moment where food became so integral to this next chapter of your life?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people assume that I started cooking at a really young age. And while I remember moments of cooking landing on me a certain way, like I remember grade eight home ec class, we would learn um, some cooking recipes. And I remember wanting to share that with my parents, like, let me cook you breakfast. And then, and that being some of the like joyous moments, me being able to cook for my parents in that way when I was, 14, 13.
Hmm.
And then oh sorry, I dropped the question.
That's okay.
What was the question?
The question was just about the moment
Oh
that
yeah. Yeah,
food
and
became
so
important.
it kind of was like this gradual thing that happened. I was going to university um, at the time, and I went in for science. That's what my parents wanted me to go into. They wanted me to be a doctor.
Of course.
Surprise, surprise. And then when that didn't work out, I got really into psychology and sociology and economics, and so that's why I switched to. And psychology started to shift my, I guess, my values and the things that I wanted to prioritize in my life.
Mm.
And materialism was something that I held a lot of in my early 20s and my late teenage years as well. And I think studying psychology, I started getting more interested in what what is needed to live a fulfilling life, and what does happiness mean, and how do you achieve happiness. I was a little misguided about happiness
Mhm.
back then.
Mhm.
And so that exploration led me to prioritize experiences over material goods. And so that started this weird shift in my work where I just really wasn't into it. I just felt like it wasn't serving any purpose for society and any big positive purpose. And for some reason at that time, that was really important to me. It still is. And so that exploration is kind of what shifted me to learn about cooking. And then I started nerding out about cooking so much. And so in about 2 years' time, I think I was, getting off work, studying on my own time how to cook for like 2 hours a day, practicing
Mm.
all the time. And so that shift started happening around then, around 2012. And I think that's what pushed me to get into catering, which kind of happened by accident. Luis Valdezin, who
Mhm.
I'm sure you know.
Yes, yeah, he
Yeah,
does all my visual storytelling for this podcast.
amazing. Yeah, so Luis is a good friend of mine, and yeah, I have so much love and gratitude to share about
Mhm.
Luis. And so Luis reached out and was like, "Hey, I have a group of creatives, and I know like catering is not something you do, but would you be interested in cooking for them?" At the time, my Instagram was kind of gaining momentum with what I was sharing with just like my adventures of cooking. And so that's actually how I got into catering, was literally that moment where
Yeah.
Luis just asked me to cater something and I said yes.
Mm.
And then that was it. Like
Yeah,
it was magic. And then
and you went on to do some amazing things, multisensory experiences, some brands people might recognize, Lululemon Lab, 33 Acres Brewing. You were there for a while, weren't you?
yeah,
Doing
33 acres was one of the big reasons why my catering blew up when it did. At the time, I had a lot of hype on my Instagram feed, and I remember doing Hawker's Market, and 33 Acres was there. They were the only like beer line, and
mm,
then there were all these food vendors. And 33 Acres and our stall, which shout out to Doug Steven back then, he helped me a ton. And so it was like a merchants, which was his restaurant before DL. It was like a merchants and Juno collab, and then our lineup was the longest by far
wow.
out of all the food vendors. And the only one that was longer than us was 33 Acres. And Dustin was there.
Yeah.
Dustin was the GM back then. And so Dustin reached out, and they wanted to do a Monday night dinner series to kind of boost traffic on Mondays.
Mm.
And so I took that on. I think we did it for, oh, my memory is failing me. I think it was either a year and a half or 2.5 years. I think it was a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
And
long time to do series, like a regular series.
yeah, it was super long time. And I remember they did such a great job promoting it. And so there was like lineups for like the first couple months. And
Mhm.
that kind of just, solidified my entry into the food world.
Yeah, which is incredible because you don't have any formal training.
No, no,
It was
it's
all curiosity and learning. And there is a natural ability in you, do you feel like, or do you really feel like it was your curiosity plus learning?
no, I think all of the above for
Yeah.
sure. I think a
Mhm.
little bit of everything. I'm trying to think of why cooking landed on me the way it did. I'm not quite sure, but I do know that my experience at the clothing boutique played a large role in a lot of what I did. I think that role as a buyer gave me kind of the an appreciation for aesthetic and design, and then I was able to transmute that into how am I going to design this plate. And so cooking, obviously, priority is nourishment and the flavor, but there was something about the visual side of cooking that really got me going, and
Mm.
that's something that stuck with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read something in doing my research. I read something, I believe it was a Vancouver Magazine article, and it said that you were shaping the visual language of our food experiences. And I
Oh
thought
wow.
that was it was such a wonderful way to describe your approach because, and also your nod for design, as you were talking about, because when I think of your dishes and the ones that I've had at various events, when I looked at the plating, when I looked at the textures, the taste on my tongue, it was an experience.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that played into my psychology education as well too. And I think there was a reason I got into psychology, and it was a curiosity towards the human mind,
Mm,
and I think that plays a big role in my explorations currently. But that psychology aspect really played into the empathy that enabled me to put myself in the shoes of the diner, especially because, as opposed to many cooks, maybe most cooks even, I started as a diner and never thought about being in the kitchen. And so that, you know, starting as a diner, I can kind of center myself in that experience and then figure out what can I shift and manipulate with variables
mm,
to create to kind of connect with that diner in a certain way
right.
that I want to. And so then it got into like not just visual, not just the flavor, but thinking about the whole experience and all the other senses involved.
Mm. Yeah, and I know that you put a lot of thought and planning into your dishes and meals. What does that creative process look like for you? And is it a process that you apply to all of the projects that you do?
Hmm. I think most of the time it's centered around the seasons. And so I'd take a look at what's in season right now. And that was kind of like the guidance and the container that you create so that you can kind of play in that sandbox. And it's like, okay, like let's say radish, asparagus is in season right now. And I want to play with that. So like that gives me kind of like a direction to go. And then I can tap into like what my current inspirations are. Um, Maybe certain flavors that I've really enjoyed recently. And so there's a bit of like recency bias to my inspirations, things that kind of spark either curiosity, wonder, or enjoyment in that moment of time. That kind of gets put into there. But I look for as much um, guidance in the sense of like that container
Mm,
as much as possible, and I think that can create interesting explorations.
hmm. And then in 2017, you hit a bit of a wall.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Can
Yeah,
you tell me about that moment?
for sure. And I think it was a culmination. It was December 2017, and I just wrapped up my last gig of the year, which, every year previous to that, that was like a joyous moment. I'd probably be out, partying with my friends or at least just like enjoying myself at home. And I remember coming home that night and just feeling so depleted and empty, and sitting down on that couch and feeling this darkness. And there was a moment of like, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing in life. It was a real moment of like unrecognizability. Like I just couldn't recognize what was me anymore, and what was just patterns. And so in that darkness, it felt, yeah, it was pretty deep. And I think the depth of that suffering was what triggered this um, sustainable shift away from it. I knew in that moment that something had to change, and it couldn't be what I did in the past, which was like all these health binges. I would go on these health binges for like a month to maybe like 3 months. And it's not like I didn't know what was good for me. It was just it felt like I was unable to do the thing I know that I needed to do in that moment to take care of myself.
Mm.
And so yeah, that was December 2017. And
Mm-hmm. How
I
long did that last for you?
I remember I had the ability to take a few months off work for the most part. And so I took a bit of a sabbatical beginning of 2018. And I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything productive, positive. It wasn't like I was like motivated to create change. I was just like done. Like my stress, my feelings of stress were intense, even when like 2 months into it, and I'm still feeling super depleted. And um, my experience was really jarring.
Mm.
That's a word that really connects to that time. And so yeah, and that part kind of allowed me to get enough space to start to explore, how do I get out of this, and what am I going to do, and where do I go? And so I think May of 2018 is when I started to go to the gym. That was like the first thing I did. And shout out to Brandon Grasuti, the owner of Pigeon. He was one of my photography clients, my first photography client. And photography was a way for me to get out of the kitchen. And so I remember Brandon just kind of sensed I was not in a great place, and he convinced me to go work out with him. And then that was kind of the start of, doing some productive things, positive things that would help me feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to start like working out and going to the gym. It was probably a really good way for you to feel more connected to your body.
Yeah, I think the connection would come far later, but definitely
Yeah.
at least like the surface layer connection of like, oh, my muscles are sore, and like, yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
definitely was the impetus for sure.
Mm. And this began this journey into mindfulness.
A rediscovery, more like. I had started, the first time I ever meditated was when I was around 8 years of age, and I was in Taekwondo, like most Korean, most Korean boys back then did Taekwondo. And so I did. I learned basically like a box breathing meditation, just awareness of breath, and then I remember I carried that through um, a lot of my life, like maybe until university. And I remember around like grade 12 is maybe when I stopped meditating. I wasn't like a daily, I didn't have a daily practice, but I would do it whenever I felt the need to be calm. And then in high school, I kind of lost that. Like
Mm.
I just something I let go of. And then when I started studying psychology again, all of a sudden you start learning about mindfulness and meditation and the benefits of that. And at the time, I was also super into self growth and self development. And so that was when I got my first tattoo ever of an Enzo, which, yeah, yeah. And then that was kind of my like commitment to myself that I'm not going to drop meditation again.
Mm.
And then when I started cooking, it was interesting. It was like when I found success for the first time in my life, it felt like to me that I could let go of all these things. Like I was good now,
Mm.
not realizing that there's a process and a practice to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I let go of it, and and especially that part of my life, I think I needed it the most out of any part of my life. I was working, 80-hour weeks at times, and really, really caught in that busyness trap and that type A personality. And I think a lot of that time, I said to myself, I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to go meditate because I'm working too much. And at the time, I didn't think it was too much. I thought that, that was me excelling, and that was, something positive to be working those amounts. And I think it's something I wore as a badge of honor, not realizing the deep implications of having that kind of mindset.
Mm-hmm. And with the meditation, I think this may have been a conversation we had a while back, maybe at Courtney's birthday. Did you go to take your meditation training or certification?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
just remembered that in this moment.
Yeah. I did meditation. I think when I got back into meditation, it was around, it was about 2018. Oh, actually, before that, this is quite relevant to the question you asked. In 2017, my ex-girlfriend, girlfriend at the time, convinced me to go to this meditation studio. And at that time, I wasn't really saying yes to well-being opportunities like that. But there was something that called to me. And I think it was like, I have a tattoo on my arm about meditation, and I haven't meditated. And someone just asked me to go to a meditation studio, Canada's first meditation studio, I learned after. And so I went, and there was the teacher that was there. Her name's Hiroko Demichelis. And Hiroko was like, I could feel this like unconditional love and acceptance, and I just met her, and I could feel this tenderness and softness. And at the time I didn't think much of it, but now I think back to that point, and it was like a seed had been planted in me that has sprouted and continued to sprout to this day. And that place was called Moment Meditation, which
It was in the Dominion building, wasn't it? Yes.
And Anita Chung and Hiroko, it was their project. And, I think it was a little early. I think meditation still wasn't as big as it is maybe today.
Yeah.
And so I started to get back into meditation deeply. And I remember during that sabbatical I mentioned, I went to Moment Meditation multiple times. And those were some of the most like calm, peaceful moments during that time that I felt. Yeah. And so
Hiro's incredible. And she came to me, how she came into my life was a referral from some girlfriends who are seeing her as their therapist. So I have, had a few with her, and you are right. She has this wonderful presence about her, and warm and trustworthy.
Yeah, it's like this like motherly energy of like, no matter what you do, I will still love you. Like that's the vibe she gives off. And it's
absolutely.
Like, it just makes
it's
you
a warm
feel,
hug all the time.
Yeah. And it allows people when they're around her to kind of lower the walls that they put up usually. And then that enables them to reconnect with themselves on a deeper level. And so it's quite, she has quite a magical touch. And does. So I remember, doing meditation at Moment quite a bit. And then I started using some apps and doing some silent meditations. And then it was around, I think what I noticed was mindfulness was having such a deep impact on me. Like the retreats I went to, inspired by like Yuval Noah Harari and Sam Harris and Jay Shetty, and just hearing about their experiences on silent retreats. And then that impact that it had on me, I think one thing that I realized I needed to, or that I wanted to do to help myself thrive, was be of service in a really authentic way. And so when I started thinking about it, I started to think like, okay, what need is there that I can provide to be of service with, that connects with me on such a deep level, and that doesn't have anything monetary attached to it. And so mindfulness was kind of that thing for me. And so I started designing this sensory experience that would help people connect to, I guess, the physical sensations of being in meditation, which for a lot of people originally that's discomfort, but then when you get underneath that discomfort, there's a lot of just it just genuinely feels good, and there's
Mm-hmm.
this intrinsic motivation that builds. But I felt like um, I could see in myself that it was hard to get underneath that sometimes. And when I could kind of tap into that, I started to design that sensory experience so that it could get people who found the discomfort of meditating, or maybe the boredom of meditation, too strong. I could figure out this way to get them tapped into that physical benefit of meditation, by utilizing senses as kind of a gateway into their own
Mm,
felt experience. Yeah.
fascinating.
And so when I started doing that, then I was like, okay, I think, because I've been a chef forever, and then I kind of disappeared from social media. And then all of a sudden, if I come out with like these meditation experiences, I feel like there's not going to be a level of trust that I think can help people get deep into in meditation. And so that was um, when I decided to enroll in the Lab of Meditation, which is Hiroko's meditation teacher training. So full circle moment back to the person who planted that seed, and
Mm,
then did that training, and it was like such a beautiful program. Everyone in there, you forge these deep, meaningful relationships with,
yeah.
and Hiroko's just, I'm so lucky to be able to call her one of my closest friends now. Yeah.
That's so wonderful. And you're talking about that for a full circle moment for you, in meeting her and planting the seed and the Enso, isn't it a circle?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, totally.
Yeah, I love that. Your first tattoo, it's all connected.
Yeah, for sure.
And so are you continuing these sensory experiences? Like where are you now with mindfulness and um, being of service to others?
Yeah, so the that sensory experience, it revolved around food and the sense of taste, um, tapping into other senses as well, but with centering around taste. And so that one I held December 2019. I held one of them, and it went really well. Kind of like, I don't really want to hold metrics, but I thought in my mind, if 10% of the attendees start a daily practice from that, I call
Mm,
that a resounding success.
yeah.
And a couple people reached out to me after the event, and they were like, I could never meditate like on my own before, and that experience shifted that for me. And so that kind of gave me like the fuel, I guess, to be like, okay, this does work. This isn't just some experiment in my mind that has no relation to life. And so started to develop it more, and now I'm starting to design multiple different kinds of events, but they all have to do with utilizing our senses as like a portal into our own experience.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's more to come, right? Like if people want to learn more, I think they can sign up for a newsletter on your site. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Yep.
So I started this website. I think it's qualia1.com.
Yes.
Yeah, and so there's a little newsletter sign up for anyone interested, and then once these events start up, then that'll be kind of the first people to get access.
Well, good
And
thing I'm signed up already. Yeah.
yeah, amazing. It's awesome to hear. And so, yeah, and then in terms of my personal practice, there's been a lot of healing that needed to happen, and I think mindfulness was the framework, and the, how do I say, maybe like the experiential agility in my own felt experience that was required for me to be able to tap into like the embodiment of repressed emotions, repressed stress, traumas that I've picked up
Mm,
throughout my life, and
mhm.
then letting those go. And so I joined um, just soon after the COVID lockdown. I joined this meditation crew called the NBD Squad, the No Big Deal Squad. Um, and it was created by Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who I consider to be my teacher now, and she's designed this incredible practice that just it's hard to I think in meditation, at least for me, I found it was quite easy to bypass certain things, especially things that were quite difficult to work through. But the framework that she provides, just it really cuts through in a way that I've never felt with any of the other Buddhist or meditation practices that I've practiced. And so that's where I am now, and it's been quite incredible, and I have so much love and gratitude for Rev and her teachings, which is loosely it's based on Zen. She's a Zen priest, and then she kind of adapted it so that it would be more relevant to people in non-monastic settings, like people living in the city. Because a lot of Buddhist teachings were written in the context of a monastery, of being not being in like a dense urban area. And so she kind of without losing any of that soul and where it comes from, just adapts it in a way that makes it feel, for me, a little more practical, a little more tangible, and a little more relevant to big city life.
Contemporary living,
contemporary living. I don't know if
so a lot more
city.
So she just makes it more applicable for people, like they can apply it
and
into their lives.
And one thing that we say is that liberation, which is like liberation from your attachments, the things that keep you stuck in this pattern, for example, like those shackles of habit, that liberation isn't separate from social justice, and so we're a BIPOC centering and queer loving space, and especially now more than ever in my lifetime, it's been impactful for me to be able to go through a lot of what we're seeing in society these days, but with a deep practice that doesn't try to bypass it or anything, but really centers on it, and then explores our relationship to everything. And I think that's where the magic really is in a deep mindfulness practice, is examining the relationships you have. And like the
connection of all things. Been learning a lot about that in my sound therapy practice, and the more that I'm diving more and more into it, even from a science perspective and understanding energy and the ways that we're connected. In quantum physics, there's no way that something can happen in one place and it not energetically affect something so far away. And it's there, and it's true, and it's whether you look at it from a consciousness perspective or science perspective, it's true. We're so connected.
It's so true, and it's crazy how many different like doorways there are into that exploration. Like one big thing that helped me tap into the interconnectedness of humans, for example, was exploring self-compassion on a deep level, but then also tapping into like mindfulness on deep levels and non-duality. I started to get really interested for the first time. Like I did calculus in university, but I didn't like it at that time, and I didn't really get it at the time. And now that I'm practicing like non-duality and meditation on a deeper level, I'm starting to understand what calculus is about. And like just last week, actually, I was like actually researching and looking through calculus on like a macro sense of just like what are the moving forces, and what's the exploration really about. And then, like you said, quantum physics, like all these things that have never piqued my interest, and then a depth of mindfulness is like tapping me into those. And so it's been such an incredible exploration of life.
And it's a wonderful way to like look back and at all the things that you learned or experienced and connect them.
I think I kept hearing growing up, like everything's connected, maybe the term oneness,
Mm.
and like I couldn't feel into it. And once I was able to reestablish a connection to myself, and I was able to recognize the nature of my mind and tap into that, I think that's when
Mm.
everything started shifting.
I'd love to explore something you said about self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
and I think all of this, the things that we're talking about right now, are very timely, given what has happened over the last 14 months of everyone's lives, and mental health and self-care. What does self-compassion look like to you? And if you were going to share um, a tactic for people to practice it or begin to practice it, um, especially now, what would you say?
I think when I was, especially into self development, and I started to become aware of all these societal issues, I think there was a separation between myself and the external world. And my focus was like, how can I affect the external world in a positive way? And that didn't work because, your bullshit will come up
Mm.
and keep you from being able to do that kind of work or be able to do that from an authentic place. And I remember early in my journey, there was a lot of grudges I held. I held a really strong grudge against my parents. There were actually many years during my cooking career that I actually would not return their calls. I wouldn't see them. And I didn't realize I held so much resentment towards a lot of, um, I guess, a lot of my childhood.
Mm.
And I remember I was struggling through, like, on my mind, I was like, yeah, like, I forgive them. I understand that if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't have done anything different because they did what they did out of love, given the circumstance and the environment that they were in and that they came from. And it was a real struggle for me because I wanted to rekindle that relationship. I wanted to let go of that resentment. But it was like a year of holding that thought of like knowing that they came from pure love, but not being able to let go of it still. And it was during a psilocybin guided um, therapy that I came to this realization. I started playing all these negative things I did to people started coming up in my experience during that journey. And it brought a lot of shame and guilt and regret. And I just started really tapping into those sensations. And then, things started coming up in my mind where I was like, oh, I need to right these wrongs now that I'm in a different place. I need to go back and like reach out. And I was like, no, like that's not fair to them if they've, processed it in their own way. And it's not my place for my benefit to bring up, old hurts within them. And then I was like, okay, I think all that matters is how I move forward from this. How do I acknowledge that these things happen and I can't take them back? But then how can I take that reality and accept it in a way where I can move forward? And then that thought
Mm.
all of a sudden gave me, like, I was able to forgive myself and
Mm.
truly let go of all those things. And when I let go of all those things for myself, then I found I could let go of all the things that I held against other people.
Mm.
And so that was my first tapping into like really realizing and embodying, wow, it really all does start with the self. And so I don't know if that's a tactic.
Yeah.
It's not a hack, it's definitely a practice. But I would say if, whatever it is, if it's compassion for others you're trying to build, as hard as it can be for a lot of people, that really does start inside yourself. And until those things are processed, I don't know if it's possible to be fully compassionate to other beings.
Mm.
Um, Dr. Kristen Neff was one of the pivotal voices in terms of my learnings around self compassion. And so that book is one that I recommend and
Mm.
gift to people quite a lot.
Mhm.
It's called Self Compassion,
Yeah.
and she does such a wonderful job where she goes through the science behind it, behind each dimension. Each chapter is like a different dimension of self-compassion. So she'll go through it like through the science, and then she'll go through it as like broad, general, like fictional examples,
Mm-hmm.
and then she'll tell her personal story, which is so vulnerable and so honest that it just, yeah, it's just something in the way she was able to relate it back onto herself really landed on me. And that book
Mm-hmm.
has profoundly changed my way of relating to not only myself but to others
Mm.
in a big way. Yeah,
And
and
that's
to animals,
and to animal, yes,
all
right.
living
All living
beings. Yeah.
things, right. Yeah, that's wonderful, and I'll put that in the show notes for anyone who's interested in reading this book. Um, I also wanted to explore your love for tea. We were chatting about that a little bit earlier about tea culture, and you were telling me about how you discovered it. So I'd love for you to share that story.
hmm I think the first time I ever got into tea was when I was deep into self development, and then I was deep into getting like, nutrition in my body, and I heard that green tea was one of the best things you can have for that. And so I remember looking up like the best kind of green tea, and then dragonwell tea came up. So that was me nerding out like back in like 2012. And then through my cooking career, I wasn't super into tea. I was definitely more into the coffee culture at that time, adding to that type A busyness culture kind of vibe, right? And then when I hit that rock bottom, one of the things I needed to fix or to heal through was adrenal fatigue. And so I
Mm.
had these insane cortisol spikes that would keep happening. And Dr. Jason Marr, who's a naturopathic doctor, helped me quite a bit in that journey. And so he got me to be off caffeine for a long time. I think I went off caffeine for a year and a half, which was a struggle because I love coffee at the time. And then when I was coming out of that, Pedro over at O5, who's just one of the most gracious people I've ever met, um, I remember going in there and spending some time with him, and his passion for tea was just so infectious. And it was a nice segue out of my addiction to alcohol and cannabis at that time. And so tea became this new thing that I could kind of geek out about and tap into my senses with. And then it wasn't until Rev did this matcha workshop for the NBD squad, and it was just so fascinating, and her passion for matcha is
Mhm.
incredible. And so that allowed me to reintroduce caffeine back into my life, and
Mm.
it was so welcome. Not the caffeine itself, but just that practice of having a ritual. And I know that can sound um, like many things to many people, but just like a consistent anchor in your day that serves to, maybe structure is not the right word, but it's just this like point that you can come back to. And if that stays consistent and constant, then you can see what's shifting around that experience.
Mhm.
And that helped me tap into subtleties, into nuance, not only with just like the flavors, but even of the whole process of making matcha, because you got to whisk it quite a bit. And so there's a bit more to it than just brewing most other teas. And so this process allowed me to really explore what I was aware of, what my awareness is doing when I'm doing certain tasks. And so one thing that I struggled with most of my life was being lost in thought. I would
Mm.
always be in my head frequently, and matcha, um, as well as doing the dishes, those were a few of my practices that I did every day around the same time, and it created that anchor for me to explore, okay, if my mind's wandering, how do I invite it to come back
Mm.
gently, lovingly, and just coming back to what I feel, what I smell, what I hear. And yeah, I
It's back
can't.
to the present
Totally. and
moment.
and that practice was so
Mhm.
incredible, and it's something
Mm.
that I do still to this day.
Yeah.
Had a nice nice cup of I think it was the S29 from Uchi Kyoto, Japan.
So much history in tea too.
Oh
It's blown my
yeah.
mind,
hmm
you know?
Yeah, Pedro has some at O5 where the cultivar, I believe his name's Suji-san. I hope I'm
Mm.
not wrong. And I believe they're like, I think like fourth, fifth generation.
It's incredible.
Yeah, just like passed down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite fascinating to hear that, like, especially just like that continuation of your family's um, output into the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found a very nice resonance to that.
Yes, that preservation of tradition. It's so important. Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, and if anyone wants to have some beautiful, uh, tea drinking experiences, O5 Tea Bar in Kits is wonderful, as well as Cultivate on Main Street
Oh yeah.
between 6th and 7th. So shout out to Jude and Lynn at
hmm
Cultivate. They're also wonderful people. So if you
Definitely.
do want to see a meditative ritual, sit at the bar there.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
guaranteed you'll be mesmerized.
I know O5 isn't doing anything indoors right now.
Mm-mm.
Um, but still worth checking out. And if you can catch, I mean, anyone there, but you can geek out about tea and learn some really interesting things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone who works at these tea shops,
Oh yeah.
they know.
They're
So
passionate.
they're very passionate about it. Well, I am mindful of the time, so I just have a few more questions.
Yeah.
One is in relation to something that you said around thriving.
hmm
And you said that, thriving is in giving service back. How would you expand on your definition of thriving past that? What else does thriving mean to you?
I think to me, I think that like how I look at thriving has shifted so much from this journey I've been on with mindfulness. I think thriving now just means that you are fully you are fully with yourself at any moment. Like you aren't necessarily like centering on yourself all the time. Like you don't want to be self-centered, but you have a connection to yourself and to all parts of yourself, even the parts that you wish were different. And I think when you're able to find that place of that deep of a self-connection, it gives you enough space and spaciousness, equanimity, calmness, peace, and all of that translates to, for me, thriving. It kind of brings ease into your life. So
Mm.
things aren't more difficult than they need to be. And when they are difficult, there are opportunities to learn and to see what's coming up within you that's keeping you resistant or bringing up contraction in your body or tension, and finding a place where you can recognize the true nature of the mind and of our awareness, and then being able to use that as an anchor and as like a home
Mm.
to come back to whenever something difficult does arise. And it's not a bypassing, it's not a distraction from, but more so like an integration and holding. And so
Mm.
one thing that I was really I found difficult was to be with discomfort, especially emotional discomfort, which would happen a lot for me. And this practice just allows you to be with what is without trying to change it. And that doesn't mean that you're complacent. It just means that you're not creating this unnecessary tension around your desires for things to be different.
Mm.
And then without that tension, you have the space and the clarity to be able to affect yourself and the world in an intentional and purposeful manner,
Mm.
instead of being reactive and trying to react to everything. You're able to kind of find some space to be able to respond.
Mm. Yes, I really really like that a lot about the intentionality, like the intentional living. Hmm. If you were going to say something to Juno back in 2017, what would you tell him with what you know now?
Hmm. I'm trying to have empathy for that 2017 Juno, where I'm trying to empathize with what he was able to receive. I think that at that point I wasn't able to receive much. Um, but I think what I would tell him is that things, the experiencing of life, the experience of, being a conscious human being going through life can be radically different, and that there's a lot of things that they were holding on to that felt like a really big deal, and that those things could be let go of, and that you could find a new way of being. And I think deep down I kind of knew that back then. That was one of the thoughts I had, was like, I need to find a new way of being. And I think that guy just needed a lot of love and acceptance, and just self-love, and that connection to self. I think a lot of my suffering came from running away from my heritage, running away from aspects of me I did not like, wanting to be a certain way, wanting certain outcomes in life. And yeah, just finding that ability to cultivate self-love, self-belonging, so that I'm not dependent or craving or striving to get that from others and like forcing it. Yeah.
My final question that I ask every guest. With what you do, what is it that you want to leave behind in the world?
That's a question I've thought about through this whole journey. And I think it lands back onto being of service. Like, did I leave the world better than when I was in it? And finding as much opportunities to help alleviate suffering and bring ease into people's lives. And so I think every project that I embark on moving forward needs to kind of hit that and align with that. And I think meditation and mindfulness can be daunting for many people, especially when you say things like, that you're going to have to go process things from your past. It's so daunting, but I cannot stress enough how much, like, the fear, the biggest fear is the fear itself. It's just, once you get onto it and start letting go, it's just like this weight that you've been carrying your whole life. It just dissolves, and you're able to be true to yourself, and to really understand what that means. Even like, what does it mean to tap into your true self? And so that exploration, I think, if I'm all I'm looking for from myself is that I help spur that in other people. I know I can't do the work for them, but if I can just pique the interest, the spark that enables you to truly be with yourself, I think that's what I want to leave behind, is like, how much interest and curiosity and wonder can I bring back to people?
I love that word that you just used, wonder. I think that we can definitely all use a little bit more of that, if we can find it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that inner child work. Rediscovering that wonder that we all used to have.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this beautiful and deep conversation. I think it's very timely, and I cannot wait to see the work you do in the world and continue to see it.
I appreciate you, May.
I appreciate you too.
Thank you for what you do. And I'm gonna ask you on the spot. We're gonna collab with a sound bath. Guided
My mind
meditation.
was going about that.
Amazing.
I would love that. So let's definitely chat.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
It will be. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that last conversation, be sure to check out more episodes of The Craft on Spotify and guest photo galleries on the website at wearethecraft.com. Thanks again for listening.